Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to National Institute of Statistical Sciences Academic Affiliated Meetup. Today's topic is collaboration between academia and industry. In this webinar today, I'll be your moderator. My name is Shumanto Boshu. I'm an assistant professor of statistics and data science in Cornell University. Joining us today is our panelists, Rebecca Dorg, Dean of Mellon College of Science at Carnegie Mellon University, Professor Sam Wilford, Professor Emeritus of Statistics at Bentley University, L.J. Wei, Professor of Biostatistics at Harvard University, and Victor Lowe, Head of Data Science and Artificial Intelligence, Workplace Investing, Fidelity Investments. So each panelist will present for 15 minutes. If there are some time, we will take a few questions then, but we will reserve most of the questions at the end of the session for 25 minutes. In addition to the moderator and panelists, joining us today are Jim Rosenberger and Glenn Johnson, who are our hosts for this webinar sessions. A few logistics about today's webinar. Attendees are set as view-only participants, so you won't be able to ask questions directly. Please use the question and answer feature to ask questions during the webinar. You will find a little Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Type in your question for the speaker and click enter. If you have questions for a specific speaker, please make sure to mention that in your question. During the webinar today, when a speaker is sharing his or her screen, you can minimize the video display of the other speakers by clicking on this little dash button that appears on top of the panel. After our session today, in the next day or so, you will be receiving an invitation to evaluate this session. So we would encourage you to take that survey. And this is also how you will receive a link to the recording of this session, as well as all the slides that the speakers used in today's webinar. All right. So our first speaker today is Professor Rebecca Dorg. She is the Glenn DeVries Dean of the Mellon College of Science at Carnegie Mellon University. Prior to joining both the Department of Statistics and the Department of Biology at Carnegie Mellon University, she was the Trent and Judith Anderson Distinguished Professor of Statistics at Purdue University. Professor Dorg's research program is focused on the interdisciplinary field of statistical bioinformatics. She is an elected fellow of the American Statistical Association, an elected fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and a fellow of the Committee on Institutional Cooperation. Professor Dorg has published over 130 scientific articles, published 2 books, and graduated 25 PhD students. So, Professor Dorg, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Sumitra, can you confirm that I'm in full screen mode, please?
Yes, you are in full screen mode.
Great, terrific. So today I'm going to talk specifically about my personal experience as a faculty member, as a department head, not so much about as a dean, but lessons learned from collaborating with industry. So this is an academic view of collaborating with industry. So this is, I have a few slides here, and I think it's important that I first introduce myself. So as was mentioned, I'm interdisciplinary by nature, statistics, genetics, computing. And my collaborations with industry have been, as I mentioned, both professional consulting, academic collaboration, and the breadth of my experience ranges from ag companies to pharma companies to technology development, startups, etc. And every time the collaborator changes, the experience changes as well. So all of my academic education and career have been in big publics. And I'm now in a small private and collaborating from a small private is different than a large public. We can talk about that at the end if we wish. So I was at Purdue University for 21 years. I ran a large federally funded research group. As I mentioned before, I consulted personally with industry. As a faculty member at Purdue, I received gift money. It's important for you to know, if you establish a relationship with industry, whether the money is gift money or whether the money comes through the university and is expected to have overhead. And so the overhead is typically at a reduced rate when compared to federal funding, but still there might be overhead. A gift is exactly what it sounds like. It's a check that you might receive in the mail addressed to the university, and no overhead is taken out of that gift. Very few universities allow gifts these days because they want the overhead. So first lesson learned, before you take a gift from industry for a collaboration or work, make sure that your university will allow you to do so. So after 21 years at Purdue, and later on I'll talk about negotiating a contract at Purdue with a large pharmaceutical company, I moved to Carnegie Mellon as Dean of the Mellon College of Science. And while I don't arrange any collaborations for scientists or researchers now, I do talk to foundations, industry, donors about money and supporting research, and you can ask questions about that later. Okay, so the first largest lesson that I've learned is the motivation for work in research in academics. For those of us who have only ever been an academic, we have no comparison. So when we start working with industry, we notice right away that the work mode is very different. So from the academic side, we're self-motivated, we're self-directed. There's no immediate deadline. Something can sit and wait for a month while we teach a class. There's no urgency for deliverables. There's no money tied to the deliverable. We don't have to produce a product that goes to market or passes any sort of protocol. We work when we want, and we work on what we want, and we can change directions whenever we want. The majority of academics are federally funded, but when we really think about it, we write reports. No one really checks whether we've done the work or not. Typically, there's no accountability that you're doing the right work, what you've proposed. It might affect the next round of funding, but there's no checks and balances on the current funding. The impact of the work might be theoretical, and it's not specifically tied to profits. And there's not always deliverables required. We're not required as statisticians to build widgets. Sometimes we produce software, but you're really not required to make that public. Federal agencies and certain publications require you to make data public. And I think that the software is going that way, but not all agencies and funding situations require it. We are free to talk to whomever we'd like about our research. We have no confidentiality agreements as academics, and we're free to talk and release results without even thinking twice about who we're talking to. This is very different than industry. So the motivation to work in industry is typically team-oriented, group-oriented. The expectations are results and deliverables. They're typically tied to profit margins and products. And the speed of the work matters because you have the rest of the company depending on you. And industry really doesn't have time to wait for novel solutions from statisticians to move the product forward. And I think that this is the largest lesson I learned both personally and as head of a department, is that if you agree to do work for industry, you need to meet your timeline and deliver. They can't wait for your research program. They can't wait for you to teach your class. They need you to do what you say you're going to do. In industry, there may be an expectation for individual research, but typically it's at a very low % of the total time. And it certainly is not at the expense of the for-profit work. The other thing that was most noticeable and notable and I'll talk about my example of the pharma company in a little bit, was the high level of professionalism and communication within industry, and that the industry employees and statisticians were professional representatives of the company. Academics tend to fly by the seat of their pants, and they might be proud of their university, but there's a different level of professionalism in industry that I think needs to be taken into account and paid attention to. So what exactly were are the challenges here that I've seen? So the biggest challenge that people have asked me, and the most common question that both individual faculty have asked me and heads of departments, how do you find corporate partners with whom to work? So it's difficult to just pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, you want to work together? Typically at meetings when they have mixers, so this is sort of how I went about it. At the big statistics meetings, for example, I would go to the corporate events and try very hard to meet directors of analytics or program leaders to see if there were opportunities for collaboration between Purdue Statistics and whatever company. The other challenges, and once those commonalities were found, then we would follow up on them. The other challenges were the expectations. So you have to be very clear up front. Are you collaborating as researchers, which means money doesn't exchange hands, or are you actually providing service for a fee, which means money does exchange hands? And that goes back to the conversation about, is it a gift? Will the company pay the overhead for the university? What are the terms of the work? Do we need a legal agreement to actually perform this work and talk to the company? That's a memorandum of agreement. And who does the work? Faculty or students? If you're involving students in a collaboration with industry for pay, you need to be very clear about who's paying the student, the university or the research program. And so if a student is a teaching assistant and you're doing research for you and you're charging industry for that student's stipend, you're sort of double dipping. So you need to be very careful about that. And then who owns the work? So for statisticians, a lot of it is software. So if you just develop a piece of software for industry, do they own it or do you own it? And something I've bumped up against recently is Dean. If a faculty member develops a piece of software, who owns the discovery that comes from that software? So you write a piece of code that does some data mining, does some machine learning, it makes new discoveries on drugs. Who owns those new drugs? And is there a first right of refusal? So typically companies will say, give us 6 months to decide whether we want that result or not. And if not, you're free to publish or whatever. And so that brings up another good point. Before you enter into these consultations and collaborations with industry or a company or an outside entity to academics, you should figure out whether you're allowed to publish the result. A lot of faculty or young faculty that need to be promoted. So there's a balance between publishing and taking care of your own career and making money to support your research. So there's a balance that goes on there. And then finally, if you are doing private consulting, so most universities allow a certain number of private consulting days a year. You may have to disclose that you're doing consulting, but the university allows you to take that money personally. If you are doing that level of personal professional consulting, the work should not be done on university equipment. You need to have your own equipment, your own computers, and the work should be done at home. So that's just a flag. Another large challenge and difference is just the speed with which work is done, and I kind of referred to this before. Industry works at a faster pace than academics, and they're motivated by a different, from a different place. So you need to be aware that if you make a commitment to collaborate with industry, you indeed will be working most likely at a faster pace. So as an example, when I was head of Purdue Statistics, a large local pharmaceutical company, and Purdue Statistics arranged a collaboration. And I just want to go through this example because I think that it's an interesting one and covers a lot of the boxes that I already mentioned. So I was the HOD, the head of department, and I went to one of these, one of the joint statistics meetings receptions, and I met the head of analytics at a large local Indiana pharmaceutical company. They had problems that were related and involved in statistics, and they needed some help, and we had faculty that were working in the same areas. So the head of department and the head of analytics decided to set up a meeting between industry and academics. So the question I get a lot is, how do we do that? So the industry component, the head of analytics, he knew the projects that needed to be worked on, and he had the leads on each of those projects write maybe 3 to 5 sentences and send that to Rebecca. And then I looked at those, and I think there were like 5 different areas. And then I looked at those and then personally went and talked to individual faculty who worked in those areas. So I didn't just throw it out to the whole department. I actually identified commonalities. Not all faculty members are interested. And when I found interest, I noted it. And we took 5 to 7 faculty members to the company. We arranged a meeting. We went for a half day. And we sat in a conference room. The industry employees, the leads of each of the 5 different projects, did a 10-minute presentation. And clarifying questions during the 10-minute presentation were fine. And then after everybody presented, then we left the industry employees and the faculty in the conference room with coffee and soda and snacks and let them talk for an hour or so. We went back to Purdue. The industry folks went back to work, and everyone was told, if you find commonalities and you find projects and connections that you want to work on, tell your head of department or head of analytics. We then, each head received the interest and we matched them together. And this worked particularly well. In the first, this collaboration with Purdue went on for a while. We did this arrangement every 6 months. And we always had some faculty member willing to work on for pay on a project. So in the mechanics and follow up to the meetings, we had to first get confidentiality agreements that we were allowed to go in and hear what they had to say. They being the employees of the company, were restricted a bit. They couldn't talk about specific enzymes and drugs or designs and things, but enough that we could talk through the statistics. The other problem that we had was Purdue had a confidentiality agreement with Purdue, the university had a confidentiality agreement with the company, but it wasn't strong enough to cover the statistics department. So as the head of a statistics department, I had to negotiate a memorandum of agreement with this company along with Purdue's lawyers. And that sounds very easy, but it was very, very long and difficult. It took 2 years. Meanwhile, we were still talking and not exchanging money, but we were still developing relationships. And we did eventually get an MOA between the company and Purdue Statistics. The way the work was done was the project was identified, a timeline was identified, typically 6 months, sometimes less, and for a specified amount of money that would come to the university, the work was done and paid for on deliverables. We did have a long conversation about who owned the software, and that was resolved on a one-on-one basis with the company. So timeline and deliverables are certainly very, very important. So what to think about from the academic side? And I mentioned this, you need to identify faculty that actually want to do the work. This is not a mechanism for a department to make money at the expense of faculty's time. So it's a nice way to fund faculty research and to give faculty experience in industry and students experience in industry, but they need to understand what they're getting themselves into. There is a difference between, I mentioned that most of our work orders in this example at Purdue were 6-month contracts with deliverables. Some of them eventually did turn into long-term collaborations where there was an exchange of students, summer internship, or a longer investment in a specific professor's research program. But they all started out as short projects. The students, again, I can't stress enough how important it is to protect your students so that they are free to publish. It's a great experience for students to be in industry and to work with industry, but we need to protect them because they're there for their education, not to worry about being able to talk publicly about their results. The money flow, this is very specific to individual universities. Sometimes when you have these work orders or research arrangements between a company and a university, some universities take a cut of that money. So the university might take a cut of the money, the college might take a cut, the department might take a cut, and then what's left over the researcher gets. So my advice is make sure that you understand how that works with your particular university so that you're not surprised by the end result. And then finally, how can you use these funds? This is not personal consulting. These are funds to support your research program, to travel for research purposes, to send students to conferences, to buy, research equipment. So make sure that you understand how these funds can be used. So in closing thoughts, successful collaborations between academics and industry are very different than academic collaborations. The end result is different, the speed is different, the intention is different. They can be very productive and the source of funding very nice, but for the academics out there, not at the expense of your career and tenure. So there's a balance between how to actually do this. It's sort of like investing in your career. You don't want all of your investment in one pocket. You need some federal funding, you need some university funding, some outside funding from industry would be nice, but certainly not all of it. I'm sure that I have forgotten lots of things, so please, quick questions now, I guess, are probably going to be okay, and otherwise just write them down and we'll answer them at the end. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca. I think in the interest of time, we will take questions at the end of the session and we'll move on to our next presentation. So our next panelist is Professor Sam Wilford. Sam is a professor emeritus of statistics at Bentley University and the founding director of Bentley's Center for Quantitative Analysis, which provides business analytics consulting services for external organizations. His research interests focus on the application of statistical modeling to real-world problems. Professor Wilford has spent over 25 years at global consulting firms, building and managing analytics groups to help clients solve complex business problems, improve performance, and enhance their competitive position through data analysis and statistical modeling. He has applied statistical methods and operation research to market research, and support customer economics, operations analysis, performance metrics, modeling, and simulation. So Sam, the floor is yours. I will mute my mic.
Thanks, Samantha, and welcome to everyone that's on the call. I'm going to talk about a slightly different type of collaboration with industry than Rebecca did, but it will overlap some of the same issues that she was identifying. So I'm going to talk about commercial consulting in an academic setting. And I know that a lot of universities out there have consulting centers, statistical consulting centers. The difference here is that ours is primarily focused on external organizations. So we don't typically have internal consulting within the university. We're doing most of this for outside organizations. So what I'm going to try and talk to you about today is provide some context, tell you a little bit about Bentley and university and how the environment there is possibly a little bit unique, but really supports the type of commercial consulting that we do. I'll describe what we call our Center for Business Analytics, which has been around for over a decade now. And I'll identify some of the issues that we've found that are important to consider for a successful consulting engagement out of an academic setting. And if there is time left, we can certainly try and answer some questions or move those to the end of the session. So let me talk to you a little bit about Bentley University. Many of you may not have heard of it. It is a private university. There are about 4,200 undergrads and 1,400 graduate students. It's a business university at the undergraduate as well as the graduate level. So its primary academic focus is different aspects of business. There's no real focus or very little focus on grant-based research, simply because most granting organizations don't provide grants for business universities. So we don't have a large chemistry department or biology department, et cetera, which would be looking for funding from NIH or other government agencies. So there's already a focus on outside organizations. Our focus is primarily in the business world, so it's very common for us to be interacting with business organizations. And that kind of fits or has been a driver of some of our academic programs. So over probably more than 2 decades, we started introducing certificate programs and various concentrations in analytics across a variety of disciplines at both our graduate and undergraduate levels. So our MBA has an analytics concentration, our marketing and Masters in Marketing Analytics has an analytics orientation, and that's been going on for quite some time. Back in 2006, we do have a PhD in business, and we started taking in students that have a focus on business analytics, and we've probably graduated somewhere between 8 and 12 students over that time. Now, we don't have a huge PhD program, so that's a fairly large contingent of our PhD students are focusing in the areas of analytics. So that also helped promote the analytics area and outside organizations. In 2015, we started a Master's of Science in Business Analytics. It now is the second largest master's program after our MBA in the university. So we have about 200 students on campus at some phase of that program. And lastly, one of the things that makes it particularly attractive to consult outside organizations is that we have experts in the university that have the business discipline expertise. So if we're doing something in finance, we can involve finance expertise. If we're doing something in marketing, we can involve marketing expertise, et cetera, so that we have not only the quantitative know-how, but we also have the business know-how, and I'll talk about why that's important in a little bit. The other piece of this that made the environment particularly friendly to set up a consulting center was that because of the nature of the university it was fairly easy to get the academic leadership to support what we were trying to do. So in terms of utilizing, for instance, administrative support and getting support in billing and bringing money in, et cetera, that was very easy to get and was made available to us. We clearly had student and faculty resources, students from the different master's programs as well as our PhD program, and faculty resources both within our department as well as some of the business departments were also key. And lastly, Bentley took an interesting approach to this. A lot of universities that have consulting centers, particularly some that do some outside consulting, do so on time release programs where faculty are given release time to work on that project, so that and then someone else takes over maybe their teaching assignment. Bentley wanted to run this in funding neutral, so They wanted the faculty to receive money directly from the projects. There is a small cut that the university takes, but it's pretty minimal compared to most of the overhead numbers that you hear people suggest. So we've actually built this in kind of a business consulting model, which has worked very well for us. So let me tell you a little bit about the Center for Business Analytics. We founded this center in 2007 with a mission to provide consulting services to support business and nonprofit organizations. We have done a little bit of work internally to Bentley, but really not much. And the vast majority of the work that we do is for outside organizations. We built a business case for this built around several key benefits. And first of all, just the fact that we were out in the business community doing this kind of activity. First of all, we're not the only center at Bentley that does consulting work with industry, but this would certainly help enhance Bentley's reputation and visibility in the business community and the nonprofit community. So that was something that was very appealing to senior leadership in the university. It was also a way to demonstrate the value of what we were doing around quantitative analysis and to spread the message, if you will, that analytics can provide a really positive contribution to decision making. Now, to give you a context point of view, for those of you who can remember back this far, 2003 was the year that Moneyball was published by Michael Lewis, which really talked about how the Major League Baseball was using, and particularly the Oakland Athletics, were using analytics to be more competitive. And in 2007 was when the book Competing on Analytics, The New Science of Winning, was published. This is by Davenport and Harris, was published by the Harvard Business School Press and received a huge amount of notoriety in the business community. So we were kind of coming in on the heels of some of these foundational analytics activities that were starting to drive business thinking. So being able to demonstrate in real time the value of quantitative analysis to a business leader was extremely valuable. This also provided a platform for us to get students and faculty involved. It's not common to find faculty with all the consulting skills that you would hope to find in a business consultant. This gave them an opportunity to be mentored and coached. It also gave our students an opportunity to get real hands-on experiences, which they could use to possibly get job offers from the clients, as well as to use their experiences to provide in their own job hunt experience, indicate that they've had practical experience. And lastly, we identified possible research opportunities for faculty, as well as employment for students, but that really wasn't the primary objective. As Rebecca mentioned, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute, non-disclosure agreements and things like that make it more difficult in consulting situations to talk about what you're doing and put that in publishable form. So the other things that we had to think about in setting up the center was that we really needed to think about how were we going to go to the marketplace. And the real opportunity that exists and still exists out there is to help support organizations that either don't have the available resources or they don't have the appropriate expertise to work on the problems that they're interested in solving. Now, in terms of available resources, many organizations now have analytics groups or have somebody working in analytics. The difficulty is that there's so much work out there that those people, those resources are fully committed. And so it's very difficult. There are many more projects available in most organizations than they have resources available to work on. So there's an opportunity, if you can define the right projects, for a consulting center to step in and provide that extra set of resources. And there's an advantage to the client as well, in the sense that these may not be long-term projects. They may be projects that last 2 to 6 months. And in that case, they may not want to go out and hire full-time employees to take these projects on. And obviously, in the case where they're kind of pushing the envelope in the expertise area, it's helpful for them to have some people who have been looking at this for a while and can come in and get them up and running more quickly. So those are the two key opportunities that exist for a consulting center like this. From a competitive landscape, when we first started back in 2007, the biggest competitor that we had were big commercial consulting firms like Deloitte, or in those days, Anderson Consulting and others. Over time, certainly a lot more independent consultants are starting their own businesses, and they can be a competition. Other academic consulting centers are also starting to look more to the outside organizations for opportunities for their centers. So there is more competition out there, but again, a university has some good benefits. A business university has some really good benefits that many other academic consulting centers can't provide. Some of the competitive differentiators that we've seen, certainly expertise. We have all the expertise of the statisticians that we have on staff, but we also have expertise in the business content areas. Timing is one that can be kind of a reverse differentiator. As Rebecca mentioned, many organizations are looking for you to throw a lot of resources at a problem for a short period of time to get a fast solution. We can't take on those projects for exactly the reasons that Rebecca mentioned, is that we have to teach classes, students have to graduate, that kind of thing. So we have to be very careful and pick only projects that allow for feasible timing, that can allow us to work on them and solve them in a reasonable pace. Certainly consulting rates, there's a bit of a competitive advantage there. We obviously can utilize a lot of the resources and the infrastructure available in the university, which is not necessarily being paid for on each consulting project. So we can charge rates that are a little bit lower than what a large consulting firm might do, but aren't that far off that we aren't getting competitive rates for the people that are working on the projects. So those are some of the issues that went into setting up the center. A couple other issues that you have to deal with in making this a successful consulting venture is something that Rebecca alluded to, but in the marketplace it's known as new business development. Where do the projects come from? And this involves something that gets a little bit beyond the typical skill sets that are available or are resident in academics. So you have to get involved in marketing and sales. Where do you go to look for new business? How do you make contacts? Now, there are some opportunities to utilize, again, some resources within the university. Most universities have development offices that are looking to create relationships with organizations, and they are out in those organizations oftentimes. So if you arm those people with a few key questions, they can start to identify opportunities, which then you can follow up on. Obviously, you have other marketing venues or avenues that you can take. We use our website, Bentley's website. We get a lot of business through that. We have some marketing collateral, not much, but it allows people who are going out, who are interfacing in different ways with organizations, can leave behind some literature that at the right time, if a problem comes up, at least they have our name in front of them and know who to call. So those are important considerations. Obviously, you can set up a consulting center, and if nobody comes, it's, you know, kind of, you can build it, but they won't come. So you have to find ways to create the kind of interest in the marketplace. And, you know, Bentley University is located in Boston, so it's not like we don't have any competitors nearby, but we do fairly well at getting clients. The other key piece of this in developing new business is credibility. When you go talk to a business executive, you need to have some knowledge of the industry that they're in. You need to have some knowledge of how their industry works, how their companies typically work, and you have to have some basic business knowledge so that you can relate the problem that they're describing to you to some quantitative problem that you might be able to help solve. You need to be able to speak the language of the executive. You can't go in and just start rattling off statistical talk. That'll get you nothing. And you won't probably get a lot of work that way. These aren't statisticians coming in the door having already defined the problem. These are, I use the example with my students. You know, this is an executive comes and says, our sales are down, what's the problem? And you've got to turn that into some sort of problem framework that you can apply some quantitative methods to help get them an answer. There are also a number of legal issues, and again, we work very closely with our corporate counsel to create, we created a draft non-disclosure agreement. So the way we work that is all our students have non-disclosure agreements with our center. So anybody who works in the center signs a non-disclosure agreement that covers all the projects the center works on. It does provide them the freedom to talk about the client they worked on and a little bit about the project definition, but not about the solutions. In most cases, if the client doesn't want a non-disclosure agreement, that's fine. We also have a standard contract that we use. The contracts that you see that Rebecca was calling a memorandum of agreement, we actually consider them legal contracts. They were structured by our legal counsel. It's much easier if you can get a client to use your contract. So we have a standard boilerplate contract that we use that gives us all the freedom to define any project that we might want to, but also covers all the basic issues that the university needs us to try and protect them for. If we get the client to use our contracts, they spend any money they want to on getting their legal people to try and address issues they have with them. If we start working with a client's contract, it's a lot bigger headache to kind of work those issues out. Rebecca already mentioned intellectual property. That's always going to be an issue, and you need to figure that out ahead of time. Different organizations are going to have different problems, and that will lead to different. And then you also have to worry about billings and collections. So somebody's got to generate invoices. Those invoices need to go out. If the client's not paying, somebody's going to have to go back and deal with the client and try and get that settled. And that may ultimately come to some legal issues. So that again comes back to the legal people. From a consulting perspective, some of these I've mentioned, but there's certainly skills that you need to think about. Marketing and sales, I already mentioned. And it goes a little bit beyond just getting the interest. You have to know how to properly plan a project, cost it out, and manage it. And project management, I know the ASA is doing a lot of work on trying to get people to understand project planning, but there's two pieces to that. One is client management, the other one is project management. And those are two separate sets of skills. And with outside consulting, you need to have both in place. You need to be able to write a proposal and negotiate a proposal with a client that sets out the right terms and conditions. And oftentimes that involves contract negotiations, which goes back to some sort of legal issues that you have to resolve. From an engagement management, and this is really the consulting part, I call it client expectation management, and this is really setting expectations with the client so that there are really no surprises. The best way to ruin a client consulting arrangement is when you surprise the client, say, well, we thought we were going to charge you $10,000, but it's really going to be 15. That's not a good place to be. Communications are key, and that means that you need to know all the stakeholders involved, because it's not just communicating to your contact, it may be communicating with others in the organization that have a stake in the project. Deadlines, as Rebecca mentioned, are really key. You have to set deadlines and you have to stick to them, so you have to make them reasonable. Report management, making sure that deliverables, that you define what the report's going to be. You may need to have some skills around dispute resolution. That oftentimes happens. And you need to be cognizant of whatever resource limitations around faculty and students, such as classes, finals, things like that. So when you build a timeline for your project, you build in the right conditions so that you don't run into problems. So those kind of cover most of the issues that I'd like to talk about, or I wanted to talk about, but I'm happy to take questions. Despite all these issues that I've outlined for you, we've been in business for about 13 years now and worked with a lot of large companies, so the model does work.
Thank you, Sam.
Yep.
In the interest of time, I think we will move on to the next presentation, and we'll take questions at the very end. I'd like to remind the viewers, if you have questions for any of our speakers, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen to put your questions, and we'll try our best to ask them to the panelist. So our next speaker is Professor L.J. Wei, who will be joining the webinar using his phone. So our hosts, Jim and Glenn, will be able to set things up. In the meantime, I'll introduce Professor Wei to the audience. Professor L.J. Wei is a professor of biostatistics at Harvard University. Before joining Harvard, he was a professor at University of Wisconsin, University of Michigan, and George Washington University. His main research interest is in the clinical trial methodology, especially in design, monitoring, and analysis of studies. He received the prestigious Wald Medal from the American Statistical Association for his contribution to clinical trial methodology. He is a fellow of American Statistical Association and Institute of Mathematical Statistics. Professor Wei's recent research area is concentrated on translational statistics, personalized medicine under the risk-benefit paradigm via biomarkers, and revitalizing clinical trial methodology. He has extensive working experience in regulatory science for developing and evaluating new drugs and devices. LJ, are you online?
Yep. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, Dr. Basu. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you all right.
Thank you very much. I apologize. I don't have my handsome picture on it because I just got a new computer. I thought I can fix my problem, fix the older problem of my computer, but it turns out it's not so trivial. I needed some teenager to help me to set up the computer. I thank you, Jim and Glenn, for this opportunity. I was told everybody in his or her life deserves 15 minutes of fame. I think I probably used up today 15 minutes. I hope I got this fame. And one thing I like to clarify, when we say collaborative research or collaboration between academia and industry, I'm just using a very narrow-minded discussion with you guys because I'm only doing clinical trials. And as you know, like a Boston area these days, we have so many biotech companies coming up every day. The reasons they all come to Boston area is because there are great institutes around this neighborhood. The reason they wanted to come to Boston because they want to utilize this biology people, chemistry people, or IT people. And interesting enough, we actually, as old-fashioned statisticians, somehow is not really their target. They want to do a close collaboration with us. So let me just explain to you very quickly in the past experience, then talk about my personal experience doing so-called collaboration research with industry. Now, industry has a short and long-term needs. They all so-called mission-oriented. For example, today they call me up. He said, LJ, we have a problem with one of our trials. We need to talk to FDA. Could you help us out? I said, well, please let me know what can I help you. So they described the problem, and hopefully we can go to FDA with those guys and convince FDA, say the company is doing is fine. So I find this is a fascinating experience. Before I actually starting doing consultation, I find this word consulting is not a really interesting word. As an academic person before, we thought a consultation is sort of like you try to make money, right? Anything with money related in academic, we feel embarrassed. But now actually it's not that quite true. I find through this consultation or the research with industry, we find fascinating problems. Now, the long-term goal for industry, if you are familiar with ICH E9, which is sort of like a guideline for industry, and FDA or EMA. EMA is equivalent to FDA in Europe. They actually have a guideline how to evaluate, for example, a new treatment against the standard of care in a clinical setting. So if you have interest in this one, you can Google this ICHR, so-called E9, and they own. I think they just published a revised version. Now, this is a long-term sort of industry goal. They try to figure out what can we do in a long-term basis, how we can actually improve the drug development, make it faster, make it more effective, right? So that's the long-term goal. But the short-term goal is how to deal with specific problem faced with regulatory people or medical fair people. You know, they wanted to promoting their drugs and etc. in the market. Now, the bullet I like to emphasize, Professor Don Barry, of course, everybody knows him. He's a famous biostatistician. And a couple of years ago, he gave a talk in public. He said the following: clinical trial methodology research is now led by industry and the regulatory agencies. The academia is not a major place anymore. So I was pretty depressed when I sit there, listen to his talking. And after he finished talking, I finally realized what happened, he said was really true. You know, like 20 or 30 years ago, I remember our department doing a lot of clinical trial methodology research. And people actually, industry use it quite a bit. But in the past 10 years, suddenly the methodologists disappear. Most of the actually in industry, also in the regulatory people, are doing methodology research in the clinical trials. Next one, please, Glenn. Next slide, please. So back in old days, our university or Harvard University Biostat department, back in like 20 or 30 years ago, we started to have a so-called partnership with industry. It's like Rebecca saying, most of the so-called gifts. Gifts means no string attached to it. So for example, Sharon Plow had a partnership with our department for many, many years. So every year they give X dollar of amount of money, and there's no requirement, no deliverable items. So what they wanted to do is Harvard people interested in anything, we are willing to listen. You can come to our Sharon Plow campus in New Jersey, give talks and etc. So this has been going on for many years, except for this Sharon Plow, Wyeth, Pfizer, Alkermes, Merck, they all are having similar partnership with us. I remember in the good old days, every year we got about $500,000 from industry. So what we do, we actually use that money supporting the junior people research. We actually use the money to supporting students, especially the foreign students, because we don't have a training grant to support those guys. And it's a really quite interesting. On the other hand, the industry started to figure out the returning from this gift to the academic world is very limited. So pretty soon they want us to have so-called delivery item. That means you have to deliver something, right? Otherwise, we cannot convince the top management give us money anymore. So now it's very difficult to get so-called a gift. And they actually want to have a contract with university. But university is so nervous about a conflict interest. For example, they have this IP issue. I think I can remember one case very similar to Rebecca saying, we have GSK proposal doing a research, specific research item, but the university saying, well, listen, if we got something interesting, we need a piece of the pie. That means if GSK has IP, we need a part of the IP for Harvard. Now, GSK lawyer, of course, didn't want this piece. So we negotiated with GSK for 2 years. Finally, I said to university, say, listen, if you don't want to sign a contract, I'm not interested in doing this research anymore. Finally, the professor say, okay, let's give you a break. So you see, this is a very difficult situation. University want to protect themselves, and they don't want anything so-called a conflict interest. But industry say, look, there's no such thing for free lunch anymore. So we're sort of stuck in the middle. Moreover, NIH grants, they actually give more money to the so-called bioinformatics, computational biologists now, very little for methodology clinical studies, for statistical aspect. So that's why we have a very few faculty members, young faculty members. They're actually devoting their time doing methodology in clinical trials, and very few students actually get involved. Next one, please. Now, I find myself, I cannot go through university channel, so I started to talking to industry myself as a private citizen, and as everybody knows we're entitled to do some kind of research or percentage-wise per week. So I find out this quite interesting. I give you 3 examples. In the recent years, our group actually doing quite a bit interesting joint research. It's not really short-term. It's actually a long-term goal for industry. Next one, please. The first example is quite interesting. This paper was published in the Circulation. And what happened is a small biotech company in Europe, they actually had a really interesting drug treating PAH. PAH is a pulmonary arterial hypertension. It's a very serious disease. And then they have a really good compound treating those PAH patients. But on the other hand, when they actually compare the placebo arm, they did a clinical trial comparisons. Because the number of events of deaths is very small, so they don't have enough power to show their treatment is better than the control with respect to mortality. Mortality is a very important endpoint. Unfortunately, they couldn't make it. So what happens, they have a registry database, which is observational study, very large, like 2,700 patients. They follow those patients to mortality and also the mobility. In any event, the question is, can we utilize the registry database and move this information compare with my clinical trial data? Right? So this is fascinating. This is actually, it's not randomized comparisons anymore. So we need to utilize the so-called prediction model in observational study and transport it to the clinical trial database. So this is very successful. So we actually went to FDA, try to convince FDA saying, look, what do you think? This is a fascinating example. We can utilize real world evidence and bring this data to the clinical trial database to compare with each other. And FDA is interesting. They said, we believe you the result, but on the other hand, this is too much to swallow, because if we allowed you to do it, then a lot of people in the past probably will march into the FDA using the older data to demonstrate their benefit. So, but we are very pleased to see this paper published with the real world database. Next one, please. Now, this one is also very interesting. As you know, the anti-diabetes drug, usually FDA is really concerned with their safety issue, especially the anti-diabetes drug may cause more MACE, which is a major cardiovascular event like a stroke, like MI or CV deaths. So in the old days, they always ask the anti-diabetes developer to have a large clinical trial demonstrate their drug is safe. Now, here's one interesting example. Usually, we just use a so-called non-inferiority trial setting up to demonstrate my drug, my compound is safe as a placebo or standard of care. And most people, because of the time to event analysis, most people use hazard ratio, right? The hazard ratio is standard way to do it. What turns out, hazard ratio is really bad. You need a huge number of patients, like 15,000 patients, to do a trial, which costs $100 million of the industry. So here is we have a consortium. It's a so-called Cardiac Safety Research Consortium, and actually sponsored by Duke University. But on the other hand, we have industry folks, we have FDA folks. I think very few academic people join that consortium. But anyway, we wrote a position paper. We're saying, well, listen, if you're interested in the safety trial, don't use a hazard ratio anymore. Use the so-called mean survival time. We call it RMST these days. That's a very simple area under the Kaplan-Meier curve, this technology. But in any event, if you use this different matrix to evaluate the safety, you probably end up, you need only 3,000 patients instead of 15,000 patients. This makes the industry so excited because every time you save their money, save their speed of developing the drugs, they love it, right? So that's the incentive. So this is a position paper just published last year in American Heart Journal, which is one of the best journal. Next one, please. Now, this one also very interesting. Pfizer's biostat director, Bo Wang, he actually saying, look, in a clinical trial in oncology, we have so-called response, right? We're really interested in duration of response. But on the other hand, most methodology is not really correct. So I work with him actually come up with this paper publishing JAMA Oncology. And now Pfizer and other companies, also FDA, really like this approach, and they actually impose on those so-called required analysis. The next one, please. So how can we actually, academia, work with industry? Need more young people interested in the clinical trial. Again, I apologize. I only speak with the so-called clinical trial, the late stage, including phase 2, phase 3, or phase 4. But I'm not an expert in discovery. I think Victor Lowe probably will talk about a lot of discovery, which I have no idea what in that area. We need more research funding. Of course, NIH has a problem because bioinformatics is a really hard topic, right? But on the other hand, clinical trial methodology is still a lot of interesting problem. We actually, I actually recommend our school create a so-called satellite companies around the university, so those guys can deliver what we promise instead of the university deliver it. I think NISS can play a very important role. I have apologized. I didn't follow NISS activities in the past 10 years, but now I routinely look at the website. I'm really impressed. You know, Jim and Glenn, you guys doing a great job. Let me stop here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, LJ, for your talk. Our last speaker for today's session is Dr. Victor Lowe. Dr. Lowe is a seasoned big data, marketing, risk, and finance leader and innovator with over 2 decades of extensive consulting and corporate experience, employing data-driven solutions in a wide variety of business areas, including customer relation management, market research, advertising strategy, risk management, financial econometrics, insurance, product development, transportation, healthcare, and human resources. He's actively engaged with big data analytics, causal inference, and is a pioneer of uplift, true lift modeling, a key subfield of data science that has been applied to areas as marketing, political election, and medicine. Victor has served as the manager of quantitative teams in multiple organizations. He is currently AI and data science, currently at the AI and Data Science Center of Excellence Leader, Workplace Investing at Fidelity Investments. So, Victor, are you online?
Yes, Can you see me?
Yes, I can see and hear you all right. So the floor is yours. I'm going to mute my microphone now.
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you for the intro. So I'm here to talk about the multiple pathways to collaboration between academia and industry. And as you have heard from Rebecca, Sam, and LJ, we already know that there are lots of ways we can partner together between academia and industry. So I'm hoping to give a sort of an overview of multiple paths. So the first one I will talk about is just some kind of context, especially in the data science area. And then I will mention about how industry can help academia, and also how academia can help industry. And also what are the opportunities for students. And the last but not least, and maybe the most interesting one for many of us, is research and publications. So as a context, I belong to, I work in a field now known as data science or AI or machine learning. Essentially, it's using statistical methods, machine learning methods, and similar kind of mathematical modeling methods in the real world. And outside of the healthcare industry, I think many of the industries now call it data science, AI, and so on. So if you Google around data science, by and large, you may see a Venn diagram like this. So there are several fields here: computer science or computer programming, stat, and math. Subject matter expertise is things like, if you are applying machine learning or statistics methods in healthcare, so you should know something about healthcare. Likewise, if you're trying to solve a marketing problem, it would be important to know something about customer relationship management or segmentation and so on. So in addition to all these more technical fields, the industry tends to require a lot of soft skills, which could range from communication, presentation, to business consulting, and so on. So the reason I brought up this slide is just to set a context that the business actually needs, or the industry actually needs, a lot of different kinds of needs. As a result, there are also a lot of opportunities for partnerships with academia. And if we dive into just the math and statistics piece, the industry tends to classify our methodologies into 3 categories: descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive analytics. Descriptive is about what happened. A lot of reports, financial reports, marketing reports, sales reports, and so on. Some of them also include significance testing and confidence interval and so on. Predictive analytics, many of us are very familiar with that. It includes many statistical modeling methods, forecasting techniques, as well as machine learning and supervised learning methods. Now, prescriptive analytics is slightly different. So if you know something about the future, even though it's not highly certain, may or may not be highly accurate, can that piece of information help you decide what kind of decision you should make? So that is related to optimization, which is also part of operations research or industrial engineering or management science. So we in the industry tend to use all of these techniques from different fields. So let's just dive into the different ways of partnership. The first one is industry helping academia. So I've been involved in many of these activities. So this is the first one is here is for industry to provide advice on program or course development in academia. For examples, so what sort of statistical methods or analytical techniques are used in the industry? What techniques are absolutely required? What are nice to have? Now, there are many techniques that are taught in schools, but that doesn't, even if they are not used in the industry, that doesn't mean they should not be taught. But those that are used in the industry, probably the academia should consider covering those commonly used methods or tools. So tools will include programming languages, software, and hardware. The other one is in the industry, there are tons of examples with big data, small data, and so on. And lots of case studies we can come up with for academia, for faculty to use for their classroom discussion. And industry may also require some other kinds of skills that could be covered in academia. The next one is lectures and seminars, of course, to provide industry applications for faculty and students from the industry. And the industry can also provide some kind of guidance for faculty and students on industry-related projects. And we can also partner on seminar series or seminars. And this section is one of the examples, of course. And we are already in partnership. And it's great to partner with 3 professors here. So the other area is how academia can help industry. So the first one is, as many of the speakers already mentioned, the industry has different kinds of goals and sometimes shorter term, and they need something done more immediately. So, but industry can look to academia to provide some kind of guideline on methodologies and tools. Because the academia tend to have a lot deeper approaches and methods that could be appropriate for industry. And academia also can provide other alternative methods or approaches that the industry may not have thought about. The third bullet point speaks to the fact that because we are in the data science and AI machine learning area, which is sort of a combination of statistics, AI, computer science, and business school training. So we can benefit from academic fields from different departments and schools. And academic professors can also provide some kind of validation of our approaches. Because in the industry, we don't have peer review like in academic journals. So this could be an impactful point. So the next one is educational advice and support. So what kinds of courses and degrees statisticians or analysts or data scientists could take to enhance or expand their knowledge? What are the papers or books they should be studying? So giving some guideline to them could be very useful. On top of that, academia could also provide tailored courses for analysts, statisticians, and so on. They can also do that for managers and executives, and even higher up top executives for the promotion of analytics or statistics. So the third area is more natural, is opportunities for students. And obviously, academia provides students, and industry also provides opportunities for the students. And the first thing is, industry can offer mentorship for students who are interested in working in industry at some point. And as some of the speakers already mentioned, there are capstone projects or consulting projects provided by the students to support the business. That could also be mutually beneficial. And others are pretty straightforward. Industry can provide internship, co-op programs, as well as full-time recruitment for students. So last but not least, research and publications that some of the other speakers already talked about. So I hope to talk about something at a higher level. The first area is obviously to collaborate on papers and books. Because academia and industry experts may have different views and different ideas, and some of them may come from different fields. The data science, for example, or AI machine learning people in the industry, some of them came from statistics, some came from computer science, and some are from economics, and other fields. So they may have different ideas, different backgrounds, and diversity is always a good thing to push for a higher degree of innovation and creativity. So different ideas is a good thing. So academic ideas, as I mentioned, some of them are very cutting edge, can be used to apply in industry applications, and some of those could be published. And likewise, sometimes it's the industry that discover specific problems. And many of the well-known statisticians like George Box and David Cox also went to the industry for a long time before they went to academia. And they discovered a lot of problems in the industry. So industry problems could also lead to new academic research opportunities. So the next one is, okay, so where do we find the data? And that is not a simple thing. But we have been exploring many different ways. And the first way is the easiest way is public data. So there are public data available like Kaggle, competition, and so on. And a lot of them are very massive data already. And some of them are pretty complex. And many computer scientists and engineers and statisticians use them to explore new methods. So that's number one. The other one is simulated data. So if industry is unable to share data with academia, we could come up with simulated data that may be somewhat realistic, and that can resemble the actual distributions to some degree. The last one is if we do have to use actual data, that tends to require a lot of security procedures, and it's not a simple thing. But we can also solve the problems using company computers and accounts and so on. So here's the list of references that are relevant to this discussion on the partnership between industry and academia. And this is all I have. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Sumanta. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor. Thanks to all the for their presentation. So we are now towards the end of the session, the Q&A part. I'd like to mention again to all, if you have any questions, to any thought leader, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to type in. Somebody's computer is not on, and I see an echo. Be Victor. All right, okay, that's much better. Thank you. So I see at the Q&A box there is a question for Rebecca. This is from Esra Kurum. So Dr. Dodge mentioned that consulting should be done by our own equipment. Was this also the case for her collaboration at Purdue until the conflict agreement passed? And with what kind of work or service we should be careful about this? Thank you.
So first of all, thanks for your question. Personal consulting is consulting that you do as expert in the field. It's not related to any relationship that involves the university. And there is most likely an exchange of money between the company and you. So you would take that money personally. In those situations, you need to use your own equipment that you own, work at home, work wherever, but keep a very clear line between your relationship as an academic and your relationship as a paid consultant. That's the first question. With respect to working through the legal issues with Purdue and the big pharma company, we had a temporary confidentiality agreement that allowed us to talk to each other, which basically means that there was a limit to how much they could say in a meeting. They could say enough for context, but couldn't be specific. So in that situation, the majority of that was conversations and learning on both parts. But the work that was done wasn't proprietary, and that was done on Purdue computing because that was a Purdue-initiated relationship with the company. And what kind of work service should we be careful about this? I think that the key is the money coming through the university? In that case, you can use university equipment. If the money is coming to your checkbook or to your bank account and you're going to pay taxes on it, which is another thing you need to be aware of, then you need to use your own personal equipment and computing and resources. So if you do decide to do personal personal consulting, please be aware that that's income and you have to pay taxes on it, which means you have to self-report. Just a heads up. I think I answered all the questions, right? I think so. Thanks. Thanks, Ezra.
So, do any other panelists has any thought on this question? Okay, so I have a related question about working hours when you are working on consulting projects or collaborative works with industry. How best to strategize to ensure that your industry collaborations do not really interfere with regular research or teaching duties in your university? Is there any advice you'd have for early career researchers or faculty for maintaining the balance between the two?
I can answer, at least from my perspective. The way that we've structured that at Bentley is we have agreement from the deans that work in the consulting work in the center is part of the service requirement, or can play a role as part of the service requirement. So while it doesn't replace research publications, it does play a constructive role in tenure decisions, and it's recognized by the university and as such. But we still have to manage it carefully. We have to make sure that we don't overburden younger faculty.
And just as some advice for junior faculty that aren't tenured yet, this is always a good conversation to have with your department leadership or your mentors to make sure that you're on the same page with the expectation of the department. Every university is different. Every leadership in a college or a department's different. So it's just best to have that conversation and maybe find a senior faculty member who has actually done some personal consulting versus collaboration within the university, and just get their advice on how it works within your own university.
Yeah, Dr. Basu, this is LJ. If I may make some comments here, is that okay?
Yes, of course.
So I think personally, consultation, private consultation, sometimes bring a very interesting research topics. Like I give you 3 simple examples. In fact, this is all helping me actually academic world too. So I think this all really not a very clear dividing, say, between the private consultation and also your own so-called routine work in the university. They all sort of fudge it together. I think the important part is the money issue. You have to make sure which part of the money is from your private consultation, which part is from the university. That's made clear. And our group sometimes doing a private consultation, bring the money, but we also donate the money to the department. For example, we call discretionary research money. That means we can use this to travel, to actually buy computers, etc. So that's allowable. So I think this between this private consultation, it's not really well defined. I think it's a fascinating experience. I strongly encourage young people get involved. The best way, if you have a elder or maybe seasonal experienced person to work with first, to understand how you communicate with clients, that's probably a bigger plus. And I think we have this idea, say, stay in the academic is a decent job. But I tell you the truth, if I were 10 years younger, I'd probably jump into the industry. I think the industry sometimes they get fascinating problems to work on it. Besides, I don't have to worry about bring the research grant to the university to support myself.
All right,
So,
I'm going
let me
to
stop
interrupt
this.
here and say that academics is the best career ever. So don't jump ship.
Yeah, I agree. You know, Rebecca, like a Dana-Farber Institute here, right, at medical school here. You know, it's a lot of directors of laboratory. They are professors or associate professors. Then, you know, a few years back, they just jump into other companies, being you know, a clinical person in industry. So I think we can do that too. Like Victor Lowe saying, right? I mean, it's a fascinating world. But allow me to just make one comment about Victor Lowe's comments about publication. You know, it's easy to say it. We have a joint publication. Every time we have a publication, if it's a negative result using the real data, the company get upset. They said, you cannot publish. See, that's the problem. University won't allow the industry to doing that. University saying, no, you cannot control our freedom of publication. So that's really one of the key problems between the industry and the university. University doesn't want industry lead the way. Industry doesn't want a university lead the way. So that's the issue.
Thanks, LJ. I think this could be a good segue to take the next question we have from our viewer. This is a question from Fanny Natanegara to all the panelists. And the question is, what has been the biggest challenge in the academic industry collaboration? So, Victor, do you want to take it first, maybe?
Right, so I think the data is one of the major challenges. A lot of companies may not be able to share their data with academia. It's not easy. So, but if we arrange a setting like professors or students could come in as almost like a contractors and using the company computers and accounts, that may be a possibility for some companies. But again, I can't speak to all. I can't speak on behalf of all firms. Some firms have different kinds of standards, but there are some ways to get around. But sometimes we don't need actual data. We could use simulated data or public data. And public data are sometimes really great. You know, tons of data out there.
So in such cases, is it possible to have a student take up an internship and work at the company's office being physically located there so that they have access to data and analysis capability on their machine? Do that work sometimes with some companies?
That student still needs to sign a confidentiality agreement and is basically working as an employee would in the company. And you really have to be very careful with students because they need a career. They need something that they can give a job talk. It gets very, you know, if you worry about the biggest worry is the legal arrangement. And the second biggest worry is protecting students. Students have more time. We all tend to put the interesting students on the interesting projects. But in the end, we have to remember that they're there for their education.
Thank you. Sam, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would agree with Rebecca that the legal issues are ones that you need to deal with, but I broaden that a little bit and just say that finding the right projects and being able to scope them appropriately is a non-trivial exercise. And if you scope them correctly, part of that scoping process is figuring out how to manage student time and faculty time and costs, et cetera. So a lot of that comes from just having a good sense as to what an appropriate project approach would be and how to lay that out in a plan that fits within the academic setting.
LJ, any additional thoughts? On challenges between academic and industry collaboration?
Yes, yes, Dr. Basu. So my point is very much like a Victor. There is a data problem, but sometimes we actually writing the computer code and send it to the sponsor. They can give us some kind of fake data, very similar to their real data. Then we're running okay, then we send it back. That can be solved, that's no problem. I think there's another issue is IP issue. the university really want a piece of a pie. You know, if you develop some algorithm, right, and machine learning stuff, and university say, hey, listen, I cannot give it to you completely. I need a percentage. So that's where it is coming back and negotiated for many, many years. So that's another issue.
Thank you. We are, I think, almost near the end. One last question from our.
Yeah. So let me just add that at Carnegie Mellon, I've recently bumped into a problem where a faculty member had a collaboration that was a collaboration, no exchange of money. The company then became very interested in his research program, wanted to fund him. The university then said all discoveries made were theirs. So the faculty member had access to the company's data, wrote the software, and the university came back and said, we own all discovery, which brought everything to a screeching halt. And the way the story ended was that the faculty member took a 2-year leave of absence, set up his own company where he worked with the first company, and I'm now talking him back to being a faculty member. So I'm saying this in case you need some creative ideas on how to work around this. There are workarounds with your university, but be very, very careful.
Thanks. That's good to know. All right, I think we are a couple of minutes over time. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all of our speakers and panelists and our hosts at NISS and all the viewers for attending this session. At the end of this session, by tomorrow or the day after, you will receive an invitation to evaluate the session. So if you could please go ahead and complete the evaluation, we'd appreciate it. And you will also receive a link there, which will let you to the recording of this session and the slides that the speakers have presented today. With that, I'd like to conclude this session now.